I think we can start. I will briefly introduce Professor Chen. Thank you so much for being here all today and joining this webinar. It's our 9th episode, so you can also see the previous webinars video on YouTube if you're interested. Thank you so much, Professor Chen, for being here today. She's an assistant professor at Tsinghua University, and her research focuses on top management, team dynamics, sustainable development, and employee work ethics. Today, you can ask questions through the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen, and you can also upvote questions. So if you see someone that is asking a relevant question, just upvote it. So in the end, the professor will be able to answer first the most relevant question, and then if we have time, completing them all. I will now leave the floor to her, and thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. Nice meeting you all. This is my first time actually joining the webinar. So please feel free to leave any questions. And then all the contents that we have discussed, we are going to discuss. If you have any questions regarding the contents, or you have suggestions or comments, please do leave either in the chat window or leave it the question and answer section. Then I will try my best to kind of share in terms of my research and in terms of all the relevant informations that I have. And today, hope you will like this topic in general. Basically, it's based on the research that I have and also based on the courses I have been teaching with the CEMS program. And this is a very interesting and I would say really relevant topic for currently, because I believe everybody has been going through a tough time, and hopefully we can together share some great ideas. And without further ado, I would like to actually go over the structure for today. So today we will actually briefly talk about the Chinese culture in general. And of course, based on that, what does it mean for companies managing business in China? And then we will share a few examples. And at the same time, we will discuss about the implications based on what we discuss around the Chinese context. And of course, before we start, I would definitely love to involve everyone in the webinar to provide your ideas. So Alisa, could you help put up the polling? So sure. We will know a little bit more about you. So just feel free to leave the first impression that you have, and then just click into those questions. They're just basic questions I would like to know about you, if you have any connections or you have ever visited China. At the same time, I would like to know if you understand the definition of value and ethics and also culture. Very interesting. Actually, more than half of the audience has been to China. Hope you have more time to discuss your experiences as well. And okay, 100% everybody has something made in China, which is very interesting. And for the third question, the answer is the only brand that's not owned by a Chinese company is actually Land Rover. That's owned by an Indian company, Tata. Feel free to search online about who are the Chinese owners. It's very interesting though, if you look into, how Chinese companies are managing their business internationally. And in fact, many of them are adopting a merger and acquisition kind of model. However, during this merger and acquisition processes, many of them are facing challenges, especially when the company try to kind of manage across different cultures. There will be, and sometimes, and most of the times, they will face the value conflicts, which will be influencing the outcome of those merger and acquisitions. The fourth question, that's very interesting. It's great. Basically, it's a normal distribution, right? It's just look like that. Very common among many of the like certain questions in regard of the evaluations. And the fifth one. So in fact, for the last one, just for the clarification of the definition, when we talk about culture is basically the informal institutions. So it's supposed not to include anything that's formal. For example, the laws and regulations that actually belongs to the formal institution. So I believe Alyssa have shared with you one of the study that I have written years ago. So that have a clearer definition between the formal versus informal. So culture specifically, when we define it, of course, different authors, different researchers might have different definitions. It's basically a shared system of values and norms by society or by a group. And of course, let's go to the last question. This is also fairly important. And the answer is actually all of them are correct. So these are basically the baseline that we will be used as our assumptions today. Without further ado, just a big applause for everybody and hope you enjoy the polling. So let's just close the polling for now and continue with the Chinese culture. So since half of you, more than half of the group have been to China, I guess you will have certain perceptions or I would say memories, right, on the Chinese context. Let's see. So in terms of China, it's very big and diversified in terms of not only the landscape, the people. I will like to start sharing with you a story of mine. Basically, I was born in the middle of China in this part, as you can see. Both of my parents were working in the university, but after the opening up, they decided to start their own businesses. So they moved to the southern part of China, and where I spent my I would say my teenager years there. And after graduating high school, I just left home, and then I went to university in the northern part of China, and then I worked for some time. After that, I went to the United States to have my PhD degree. And after that, I went back to Beijing and start my job in Tsinghua University, which is a lovely place. I highly encourage you to visit Tsinghua sometime if you visit China. So the reason why I would like to share with you my lifetime story in a really short and compact way is that for many of the Chinese, traveling around the country or traveling around the world is actually very common. Even though many of the Chinese residents or Chinese people are not internationally traveling, but many of them have been traveling within China, and not only for the relaxation or leisure reasons, but also many of them travel within China for work purposes. So you will find that many of the studies or even research talk about the migration, internal migration in China that actually builds up the landscape of the businesses and how business has been run. But before we actually jump into the business context, I would like to share a little bit more about the common knowledge of China. So you can see here in China, it's very diversified also in terms of the ethnicity within the country. And you can see also that because of the one-child policy and the Han, I would say the Han ethnicity is actually the percentage is dropping. But recently there is a second-child policy, and also the population has been also shifting and changing a little bit. And if we look into the languages, Putonghua, which majority are speaking, is not actually the only speaking language. There are many dialects within China. For example, where my parents are staying in the Guangdong province, we also speak Cantonese, which is one of the popular dialects that has been used in China. And given all those diversities, we can see that lifestyle could be very different across different provinces. Here it's a different styles of how people enjoy tea in China. So maybe you can quickly go through them and imagine in which provinces or in which areas of China tea have been served like that. Maybe if you have been to China, you have already experienced some of them. And here are the answers. Very interestingly, you will also find that people in different areas have a different way of enjoying their lives as well. So that makes it very complex for a company to make strategic choices, especially for a successful Chinese company. If they want to enter into different provinces or reach out to different customers, they will also have to consider those diversities. So that kind of serves as the foundation, how diverse this market could be and how complicated even for Chinese companies to compete within China. And of course, if we're looking into the management field, there is actually a evolution of management happening over time. So at the beginning, I would say it's very, very early in the history. There have been business persons thousands of years ago. So one of the very, I would say, recent dynasty, Ming and Qing, the last two dynasties in China, there was a really famous group of business person. They actually located in the middle of China. It's called Shanxi. They have developed a bank-like organization to actually manage money transactions within China. And they actually base everything in terms of management philosophy, practices on their experiences. So at the beginning, when business person or business clubs or consortiums being formed, many of them are following their past experiences. So in China for thousands of years, businessmen and organizations has been learning a lot from the past experiences. And that also serves as a foundation. Even today, you could see many of the companies, they have certain inheritance of those experiences as well. But as the opening up, many of the Western philosophers and then the methodologies and tools has been introduced into China. And that's where the business schools being established. For example, for Tsinghua, it's not just from the beginning, the management school. It's been only established for a couple of decades. And then many of those universities within China, which have a management school or business school, they will actually introduce the Western theories and tools into their management classes. And during this time, I would say that was like a couple of decades back, and between the opening up, many of the schools are trying so hard to learn the scientific methodology. And here also, and at the same time, more and more leaders are realizing, or more and more companies are realizing that only by following these scientific methods or just focusing on the shareholder values is not actually helping the company to develop over time for a longer term. So that's why about a decade ago, or even 15 years ago, companies are trying to find new ways to manage their businesses. And that's when values has been, I would say, focused a lot and emphasis a lot. But always keep in mind though, value has always been the theme of Chinese management, even when we're looking into the history 1,000 years ago. People look a lot into the values, and then the values they want to share, they want to practice, etc. And however, also given the influence of the Western academia, and more and more companies are gradually learning the stakeholder management, and then in practices though, they translate it into CSR. So you will see many companies in China catching up and learning how to practice CSR and how to manage stakeholder relationships. So this is basically the whole evolution of management, I would say in general in China. So I have a question now. Maybe I can just go over the question first, and then we can continue. So the question is, seems like there are many subcultures in China. How can foreigners distinguish, manage, and utilize these subcultures when they do business in certain part of China? That's a great question. I would say for this question specifically, even for Chinese managers, they have to learn a lot. There are many ways, of course. Later on, I will also share some of the examples with you to help you understand how we are able to actually elaborate on certain differences of the subcultures. I think the first step will be just pay attention to the differences and the similarities and also learn. So in terms of learning, there are many books actually available talk about the subcultures within China. And then many of the Chinese company, when they start making, I would say, introducing products or services into the market, they would definitely do market research, and that's very important. And for many of the foreign companies, when they enter China, they might face the challenge if they do not spend the time and resources of understanding or learning the culture. But just also keep in mind though, the subculture doesn't mean it's like 1 or 0 or black or white, that kind of differences. It could be just certain characteristics being a little bit different. So the combination could be different or the focus could be different, but it's not necessarily to be a black and white type of differences. So that make it easier if you have experiences. And that's also why for many of the businesses, they start within certain region and then they extend it over to other provinces. And even today, you will also find certain companies, especially Chinese companies, they succeed in certain area in China, but they are not likely to succeed in other part of China. And that's totally possible. And that's not gonna hurt though, because for companies, the goal is not just to succeed in all over China, right? They have to succeed in the target markets. So I think that should be something relevant to think about. Of course, by following that, so the differences between subcultures, the second question, I think that will also be very interesting. I guess one example will probably help you understand better. This example is basically related to the recent change of the policy of how we manage garbage. So this year, starting this month, Beijing also started the garbage categorization by the citizens. So Shanghai and Shenzhen was among the first cities that start to categorize their garbage and then recycle in a more scientific way. But both cities have adopted very different ways. For example, in Shanghai, the focus is on the penalty. So for example, if you throw out garbage in a different category, you will be put into a small fine. But in Shenzhen, they adopted a very different way. So in Shenzhen, it's by giving you a reward if you do things right. So in certain apartment complexes, you can receive more than like 1,000 RMB as a bonus if you are able to actually select the garbage right. So this is very interesting if you're looking into the different practices being implemented in different areas that kind of reflects the different cultural or value assumptions within those regions. So later on, I will also share with you more of the company practices that could help you to understand a little bit more about those subcultures. But always keep in mind that subculture is not that different in terms of it's not going to extremes. So that's something you should probably keep in mind. So when we talk about values in China specifically, we have to go back into history of the Chinese philosophies. So if you're looking into the practices and management philosophies today, the three, I would say Asian philosophies are served as the backbone of many of the values that are being shared. So Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. So what is it, right? You probably have this question. I do have one of the examples. This is one of the learnings that I like very much. So it talks about how individuals treat their lives and treat others and manage their life as well. So basically in Chinese, it's called 以出世之心行入世之事. It means that if we translate it into business practices, it might mean that you will focus a lot on the long term in terms of the benefits to the society in general, not just only focus on the physical, the materials. One example I would like to share with you, it's a tea brand in China. It's actually founded by a Tsinghua alumni. The brand name I will not share with you because this is not an advertisement. So what he did, the founder, he actually loves drinking tea. And before he enters into the tea businesses, he was really keen into finding or producing a brand that is really, really safe. Because as you probably know, for tea, many of the challenges are in the quality, how to quantify and how to measure the quality. So what he did is that he spent a few years just to try to transform the land that's being used to plant the tea to make it zero residue. and to make it safe. So the way that he's trying to make the product safe, he goes back into the origin of it and then spend a few years making zero money just to focusing on transforming the quality. So I think that also kind of goes back to the Chinese philosophy and then goes back to this learning that I share with you on the screen. And of course, in general, there are many different Chinese concepts you probably have heard of. And this is just a few that I listed here. You might know the definition of it, but those are actually very much being used within the Chinese context and with the examples we'll be sharing later on. Then we'll definitely touch a little bit more upon those points. And in general, however, if you're looking into the Chinese management, especially the Chinese leaders, a holistic view is usually what has been guiding them to make business decisions. So what do I mean by a holistic view? So I listed a few key points within the holistic view. So there's another question pumping up. Let me probably just go through both of them and then we can continue. So the first question is, are there also punishments for society undesirable behaviors? I think in Europe, we are more inclined to find incorrect recycling. That's a very interesting question. I think the other one is related to the previous contents. The question is, we know that the traditional business may face difficulties when trying to enter other regions regarding different subcultures, but now companies like TikTok, it seems that culture is the less important factor. Those are really relevant questions. Let me go to the first question first. This is really a practical question. That really depends. It's really huge. I mean, for certain behaviors of the organizations, definitely is being punished if you are not following the law, for example, and then there's a price to pay if you have hurt the feelings. I will go to hurting the feeling part later because this also related to our assumptions. We talk about the sentiment, law, and reason, and that kind of have governing how the companies are running and how companies being influenced, not only by the law and regulations, but also by the people. And the second question, I think is very important as well, because many of the brands, if you have taken an international business course, you probably know that many of the companies have been suffering given that the origin of the country. So where they have been, I would say, started their business from could be a barrier that they have to face, or it could be an advantage. So many of the internet companies, for example, they try to minimize the image of the country where they were born, and they try to make a more international brand. And of course, we'll have more examples. Actually, I have an exact example later on. So bear with me. I will share an example of like how the culture might hurt if you are not really establishing an international image. And back to the holistic view, it's basically there is a similar Western philosophies that are related to the holistic view. So that's why in many of the Chinese companies, if you talk with the top leaders, they will not give you the specific guidelines. They will give you a view, a picture we call the big picture. So usually, if you want to be a very successful leader in China, you have to think of the longer terms, the bigger terms. So we call in Chinese 大局观. At the same time, if you look into the successful leaders, you will find that they are always the one being so creative. They're always questioning the status quo, and then they're able to elaborate and based on the data, and then come up with very interesting and creative solutions. I will come to those examples as well as later on. And of course, there's a movie, actually this is from a sci-fi novel. And it's very interesting for us to understand a little bit more what does it mean for a holistic view. So I highly encourage you to either read the novel or just watch the movie. So it kind of reflects on how Chinese philosophy is about. And that's why we have the yin and yang, we have the paradoxical leadership. It's very interesting that we see actually practices in the field that reflects on those Chinese philosophies. And just as I mentioned that, in many of the Chinese companies, they try to manage both the sentiments and also try to manage the informal institutions, meaning the law and regulations. So what do I mean, right? What does it mean by the LRS model? It's basically that when companies are managing business across different cultures, there will be influence, of course, first of all, the law and regulations. If you're not obeying the law, that makes you illegitimate, meaning that you will lose your business in certain contexts. But at the same time, if you are not paying attention to the feelings of the people, you might also lose your businesses. So here I just have a brief definition. You can also go to the paper that I listed here, Yang and Zhang 2015. It's a very interesting paper, talk about how companies in China manage conflicts, especially value conflicts. And so sentiment shares a very important role in the Chinese context. If a company fails to manage that, they might face many challenges. So here I would like to share with you one of the examples. You probably everybody have used Starbucks, right? It's one of the most popular coffee brand all over the world. So I would say more than 10 years back, this is Forbidden City. Starbucks had a small shop within Forbidden City. However, during 2007, there's one very famous media person that he criticized Starbucks that Starbucks is not fitting in with the Forbidden City culture, because you probably know that Forbidden City is a representative of the Chinese culture because it's where the royal used to live in. And it's one of the most popular sites in Beijing as well. So Starbucks used to have a small shop there, but because of the criticism started by this social media guy, and many of the people in China have a debate. They think that maybe we should not invite international brand into such a strong national brand, the image of the Forbidden City represents. It doesn't fit, so people want to take it out. So just for really quickly, Forbidden City was kind of driving out Starbucks. And then in 10 years, there's no coffee shops whatsoever exists in Forbidden City, because it seems that coffee represents Western culture. It's not really fitting in to the perceptions of many of the local citizens. I would say this is definitely a really extreme case. But I think Starbucks at that time was not really serious about how to manage that. And they were not able to salvage their positions within the Forbidden City. And then also for Forbidden City, they were really reluctant to introduce coffee again into the site because they are afraid that the criticism will also arise. And it's after 10 years of that debate, it's in 2018 that the Forbidden City finally introduced coffee shop into the Forbidden City. And then they are actually running very successfully today. It's very interesting if you see that actually the culture and the perceptions of the local people are also changing. So after 10 years, the coffee culture has been introduced and blended in with the local citizens, and becoming more acceptable. And of course, this is a very interesting example though to also help companies or managers understand how challenging it could be if they're not able to manage sentiments in a right way. So how do companies do that then? Probably you will already have that question. So let's continue to look at the specific companies' practices. So before we start sharing the practices, let's look into the famous brands or brands that have a strong influence within China. So here, those are a ranking of all the Chinese brands. I apologize, it could be kind of too small on your screen. Do go to Brand Z report if you want to know more information. They have been ranking the brands over the years, so you will know the differences. You can see here the top 10 overseas presence of the Chinese brand here as well. It's very interesting. Many of them are tech related, especially recently, and digital related. And of course, there are also traditional brands that were famous, for example, the energy companies in general, because they make more money previously. but today, most of the company are actually internet-based or tech-based. And in China in general, there are the homecomer brands as well. So this is very interesting to look into the landscape of the most, I would say, value creation are happening in the different industries. And of course, if you're looking into internet specifically, here is a very interesting study that based on the data of Google app and also Apple app. You probably find that already that here in the social messaging, TikTok has been really popular, especially people are staying social distancing. And they have to try to find a way to entertain themselves. So TikTok has become so popular more recently. And also there are in the shopping area, the AliExpress and then the Pinduoduo has been very popular downloads. And those are actually very interesting trends in China. You can see that given the booming of the internet and given the booming of the social media, many of the Chinese companies are able to compete internationally. And in fact, those are the new developed industry has less, I would say, restrictions for Chinese companies. They're basically just from 0 to 1. They're trying to shape the industry as well together with the international competitors. So compare with the more traditional, for example, manufacturing, wholesale, fashion, for example, there are less available or famous Chinese brands. And of course, now I have two questions. Let me just go a little bit through that before we go forward, because this is related to what we just talked about. So the first question is, I'm wondering why in Forbidden City it is incorporated with a coffee shop and not a tea shop. Okay, Chinese has a way deeper drinking habit of tea compared to coffee. Also for the Starbucks topic, and maybe for the Luckin case. Yes, the Luckin case is also very interesting. So this is actually, the answer is there are tea available. Of course, there's not just only one coffee shop. There are many different restaurants and smaller food shops within Forbidden City. So help yourself if you're able to explore that. That would be very interesting. That actually goes back to the drinking habits. It's slowly shifting. Of course, according to data, there are more tea drinking, I would say, in the cities still compared with coffee. And of course, given that because of the smaller shifting, there are more varieties of the product and services being accepted by the common consumers within China. That also brings in the opportunities for Chinese companies. I guess that's where Luckin Coffee has been played a very important, but sadly, a failure role in the market. So the second question is, I'm curious, since we talking about values, whether the professor can comment on the ethical aspect of having a points-based system like the one in China, which, what do you mean by points-based system? I'm not really sure. Maybe you can type in more about the point system that you refer to. And let me jump to the next question. So the next question will be, we see a lot of joint venture strategies out of China. In fact, there are a lot of outwards foreign direct investments into various countries across Southeast Asia, etc. So Alibaba Group being a core driver for Malaysia's e-commerce, and China being a strong agricultural properties and winery powerhouse in Australia, etc. And there are big economies or even local communities which sees this as a threat due to concern of a full acquisition affecting the local community's culture. I think those are very important and really relevant questions for Chinese company going abroad today. This is a very interesting example as well. I believe you have been exposed to many of the criticisms of the buyouts of the Chinese companies, especially the concerns around the value and the cultures and the possible shifts of those value and cultures. I guess one of the examples I would like to share with you is actually from Volvo and Geely. Geely is actually a Chinese automobile manufacturer. And when they purchased the Volvo brand, it was also a very tricky decision, because the Volvo team was not really confident with the Chinese company. They do not really know what the company is about. And then they were not really kind of having a lot of information about how this Chinese company is running, and then they have a perception that the Chinese company is only buying this company because they want to have international brand, etc. So there are a lot of misunderstanding between Geely and Volvo at the beginning. However, the Geely team has been adopting a very interesting policy. They have let the Volvo team to do whatever they want. They have give them 100% power to make decisions, and also they let the Volvo team to develop themselves instead of interfering in any aspects, especially the culture aspects. So in general, so for many of the Chinese companies, what they have been experiencing a lot of challenges is how they manage the different values, especially when we think about the Chinese philosophies versus the Western philosophies. There are commonalities between the two, but there are also differences. But the perception-wise, the difference is so wide, meaning that many of the companies that are international company being bought out by the Chinese company have the natural fear of being purchased by the Chinese company. However, so there are successful cases, for example, the Geely and Volvo, because Geely giving the 100% power to the Volvo partners, they gradually figure out how to make it work. And then later on, they actually establish really good collaborations based on new projects. So this is just one of the ways Chinese companies able to manage the different values. However, there are also Chinese company not able to do that. For example, maybe I should not point the name of the company. So what they did is that they sent out the CEO to a foreign country and then let the CEO to lecture about the corporate culture. So apparently that's not gonna work, right? You cannot just preach people about the culture that you believe in. So in that company specifically, they were not able to translate or actually share their values within the culture with a different nation or different cultural context. So this company was not doing really well in terms of how they try to manage the culture. So I will later on also share a little bit more on that as well. But definitely for Chinese company, they have to really learn. But on the counterparts, the foreign company, and especially the foreign management team, they also have to learn about the Chinese competitors, because the perception-wise, if they have this fit perception about this huge differences cannot be, I would say, crossed, then that will face a little bit more challenges as well. Later on, of course, I will also introduce you a documentary about Fuyao Glass. That's also a very interesting example of Chinese company going into the United States to manage a local manufacturing company. They also face a lot of the cultural clashes. Of course, so let me see, it seems there are also other questions. Thank you so much for giving me the many thoughts in your questions. Here, so thank you for the point-based system. It's not really common in China. Yeah, I think probably we should share that as well, because I have really no idea what do you mean by a point system. Yeah, I still do not really understand that, but do like maybe leave somewhere to let me know what the point system you're referring to. So let's continue. So let's come back to the internet current development of the Chinese companies. Let's see how they actually manage values in China, and then how they extend overseas. There are failures, there are successful stories as well. So in China in general, if you're looking into TikTok, so on the left is TikTok. In China, it's called Douyin. And on the right is actually a strong competitor, also the first comer in the market, using the short video format that's called Kuaishou. In fact, Kuaishou at the beginning was the winner of the Chinese market. They actually focused on a very specific and unique customer group. They are basically the youngsters that are living between cities and rural areas. And then they are the group of people that have less opportunity to speak out what they like, their values, etc. on the internet. So Kuaishou provided such a platform for those youngsters in a less represented area. So it became really, really popular. And later on, TikTok entering the market, but they are definitely kind of targeting in a very different audience. They're targeting at youngsters in the big cities. So you can see from the both pictures, they represent different lifestyles. That also shows how diversified Chinese cultures are. And today, if you're looking at international markets, TikTok is definitely doing a lot more better. And of course, Kuaishou is trying to catch up. They are now entering into online educations as well to try to catch up with TikTok. And I will also continue to share with you another very interesting story of an internet company. So this is a company that's very interesting, that has been put into the spots and being criticized by the kids. So this is called DingTalk. It's actually an application that teachers use to teach the kids, given the social distancing policies in China. So people are staying indoors. However, the kids have to go to school because our school semester starts in late February, early March. So DingTalk has been used in many of the elementary schools, junior and high schools, etc. So they have been criticized a lot. So I have a video actually to show how the kids are actually being pissed because of this DingTalk. And let's see what they did.
Students who've been on lockdown were assigned homework through an app until they figured out a way to get out of it. In lockdown Wuhan, teachers used an app called DingTalk to set up homework. Kids realized if it got enough one-star reviews, it would be removed from the app store. Thousands of reviews flooded in, and DingTalk's rating fell from 4.9 to 1.4 overnight. That is amazing. Although, I will say, it is a bummer for the people who built that app. I mean, you conceive of an app, you develop it, you go through rounds and rounds of beta testing, you finally have a successful launch, and then this brings it down. Hey, what happened to that app of yours? Oh, a bunch of dickhead kids one-starred me. Well.
Right, so that's just like how the kids are reacting to the app. And they are really pissed because they have to go to school even at home. So they hated it. So they rated this application as 1 star. And if you go through the comments, it's very, very funny. And also, DingTalk has been implemented in Japan as well. So they also face the same low rating in Japan in the App Store. So it's very interesting. So what DingTalk done is that they made this really funny video to apologize for those who has been rated really low. So I'm sorry I don't have English subtitle, just kind of give you an overview of how.
聞いて聞いて、この美しきアラーム。見て見て、このデザイン感あふれるページ。天下一線安心さ800よ命だけは助ける。みんな僕のパパ。分かってる。先生たちの授業配信のために朝シャンプーをしていること。分かってる。せっかくのお休み、みんなもっとゆっくりしたいってこと。でも僕のせいじゃないじゃん。5つ星用がいかつでお願い分割払いにしないでそれからよく見て僕ツバメことの旗のあれとは無関係
You're trying so hard to use a local way to communicate with the local consumers. So this also kind of reflects on what we talk about the sentiment law and reason. So in general, for many of the Chinese companies, if they are actually managing successfully internationally, they usually is very good of understanding the local culture. That also helps them to build up their image and reputation. So after this video is posted online, many people has actually, I would say, kind of having really positive comments on this apology MTV. So it's very interesting how the internet company are adapt really fast and to be able to manage the sentiments exposed to them actually hurts their performances. And of course, there are many of these such examples that you could find. And many of the Chinese companies are actually learning as well how to manage sentiments across different cultures. I would say this is really, really challenging and it's very important as well. So other than these examples, I would definitely go a little bit deeper into who are the key players in the Chinese market then, right? Those are the internet company, but internet company, always keep in mind that they are not the major players within the Chinese context. So in general, if you're looking into the data, so in general, there are two major types of companies in China. So first of the companies are the SOEs, state-owned companies, and they are central-owned versus the local-owned. The difference is that the central-owned SOEs are actually governed by the central government, and the local-owned are usually by the provincial government or the city government. And of course, the larger and then the other larger part of the companies are the private businesses. If you look into data, more than 60% of the GDP are created by the private businesses. And then there are a huge number, they have provided a lot of the, I would say, employments, as well as the innovations in general. So for them, they face different challenges. For example, for the SOEs, because usually they're perceived of taking on social responsibilities, many of times they were being criticized, they're not efficient enough in terms of their profitability. That's why over the years, the reform and transition has happened. So many of the state-owned companies are going through a reform and transition. If you are interested, you could definitely go into, there's a very interesting case on the SOE reform by a scholar in Singapore. And they talk a little bit more about the history of that. And for the private companies though, they are the driver of the innovation. And then they have to face the diversity of the culture, especially across different provinces. Always keep in mind though, doesn't matter if you're an SOE or a private owned businesses, usually you will find that the top management team, the founders specifically, or the founding team are the decision makers who are the core of deciding or developing the cultural values of that company. So it's very interesting. You will find many of the reports are around the founders. And usually they have a really strong influence on the brand, on the reputation, and on the future of those companies. However, when you're looking into those companies going abroad, both the state-owned companies and the private businesses face similar challenges. So the biggest challenge will be reputation and recognition. Actually, that reflects also in your questions that I just raised, that you will see that many Chinese companies are struggling with the image that have been perceived in a different culture. At the same time, those companies are also, I mean, companies in general in China are facing also the sustainable development challenges. You probably know that the Chinese government have signed in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a promise in that to actually to transform the environment, to be able to create positive impact, etc., to focus more on sustainability. But many of the Chinese companies are just catching up. Many of them do not really understand or have been having a lot of experiences working with stakeholders. Many of them do not even know how to identify stakeholders. So that also creates challenges. I will go a little bit more into that afterwards if we have more time. And of course, here, if you see in the picture, this is where, like, before the opening up, people are like under the rations, and then they use the tickets here to purchase all the necessities at home. And then also people are having meals together. So this is before 1979. So that's where before the opening up. Because of that, many of the companies after the opening up are becoming so diversified. That's where the private business sectors are booming. And if you're looking at the SOEs, there are many challenges as well in terms of the SOEs management. For example, first of all, because there's a mix of the Eastern values and the Western methodologies, many of the Chinese SOEs are being actually criticized a lot. And today, if you're looking into the reform and transition, many of the SOEs are actually trying to develop their own theories at the same time, develop their own ways of management. So when we talk about Chinese stories, we actually as scholars as well trying to figure out are there any like theories that could explain the management styles and models that are being adopted in Chinese companies specifically. And you will see very interesting though in the picture, this is very common in SOEs, that it's very hierarchical. The power distance is really high compared with the multinational companies, and they usually have a specific way of managing their staff as well. So this is something that kind of creates, I would say, sometimes the different perceptions between the Chinese companies versus international companies. Because when you think about Chinese company, this could be the first image you have in your head. However, if we're looking, because of time constraint, I will probably go into the private businesses instead of going more into the details. So for the private businesses, I think Shenzhen is a great example for you to explore of the many brands that they have. So here I've listed a few brands, and they are actually the leading players in terms of R&D and innovations as well. Of course, feel free to search all of them and then to see what they do. In fact, if we're looking into, as I just mentioned, the private sector is actually considered as a very important part of innovation in China in general. So this is the data from 2018 and 2017. Actually, you will see that the biggest investors in R&D as a company are this, and then they are other than the last one, that's China Oil. They're all private tech companies. And this is the overall, in general, how in different areas of the world, how actually R&D is being spent. So this actually comes up, actually goes back to the question, right, about like in general in China, how companies are actually, if there are such a diversity, right, how companies are facing the challenges of reputation recognition as well as sustainable developments. So if we look into it, there are the top-down and then the bottom-up approach. So for top-down, here are the two directions that are actually being emphasized a lot. The first direction is actually the Belt and Road initiatives. So it has been encouraging the companies to go outside of China to establish relationships with company organizations around the world, and also between the government collaborations. And at the same time, you will also find that the SDGs also serves a very important role in the developments. Even though the number you see here is not really huge, but the influence is really huge because they're sending out a signal of what are the important directions that companies supposed to focus on, because many of the Chinese companies, as I mentioned, they have a holistic view. So they try to catch up the signal within the policies, and then they try to adapt, and then they try to work a little bit one step further than the other competitors. And of course, when we talk about sustainable development, what do we mean, right? So here, just as I mentioned, there's a top-down way as directed by the regulations, the laws, and all the initiatives. But at the same time, there is a bottom-up approach, meaning that many of the startups are also showing their creativities within this field. If you're looking into the development of social enterprises in China, you could also find this trend. So a couple of years back, there's no definition of social enterprise in China at all. But recent years, just starting from 2018, you will find cities, big cities have been establishing regulations to help social enterprises to grow. But at the same time, many of the companies are also trying to learn and develop their own ways to tackle the sustainable questions and challenges. And Yili, I think, is a very interesting example. And of course, when you look into the Yili practices, they have learned a lot with the Western collaborators. For example, the packaging company Yili is collaborating with have been carefully sourcing out the partnership. So that also brings in the pressures for the Chinese partners, because they have to be able to catch up, be able to match with that standards, to be able to become a partner. So many Chinese companies also learn so hard with their international collaborators, but at the same time, Yili has encouraged the employees to come up with the stakeholder management programs to connect. For example, Yili has developed this system of supporting the milk for the rural area schools. So this is actually come up with by the employees. And then they have been doing this program for years. And before they initiate this free milk for elementary kids, they have no connections with the local governments because the government do not really want to talk with them at all. But after this program, they were able to connect and be able to talk with the local government and be able to reach out to more audience in the rural areas. So you'll find that company, even really big successful Chinese companies, are also trying so hard to learn and to learn how to collaborating with different stakeholders. But at the same time, many of the companies are still struggling with how to define stakeholder management, how to define stakeholders, and sometimes many of them use CSR as a tool to communicate with the external audience. So this is also posing a lot of challenges for the companies, especially Chinese companies, and how they're able to develop a really successful system to support a sustainable development. And of course, if you're looking into the different companies, those with international experiences are actually doing better. That definitely make more sense if we're looking into the landscape of how Chinese companies are evolving over time. They're learning from the partnerships and they're learning also from internally. So this is basically the general landscape I would like to share. But given that our time is supposed to end really soon, shall I continue with the implications or should we just open the floor for the questions? So Lisa, what's your suggestion?
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. Maybe we can briefly introduce the implications and then see if they have questions. For now, there are 2 out there. So yes, I think, and in case whoever needs to leave, don't worry. Of course, the video is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube, so you can see the end at a later stage.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I'll probably take maybe 10 more minutes of your time. And here the 2 questions actually, it's not questions, but it's more like a suggestion. Maybe Alice, you can just post them so the audience can see it. So let's go a little bit more to the implication then. Now we talk about in China in general, what is the overall philosophy is governing many of the leaders, and also the focus on a package or a holistic package of sentiment, law, and reason that kind of guided the companies. But at the same time, Chinese company also facing a lot of challenges, especially reputation recognition and also sustainable development. So what are the possible implications we can draw from those examples, right? I guess here I only listed the things that I'm interested in. It could be really, really relevant as well for international companies. So given the challenges, the company has to figure out a way to make sense of the challenges and at the same time make use of, actually make those characteristics and those resources that they have counts. So the first point I would like to share is basically, in general, the Chinese company are trying so hard to stretch, meaning that they try to figure out the potential of the diversity, the limited resources, and then try to implement on conventional methodologies to be able to win the market. So even within Chinese market, it's really hard for the company to succeed. And at the same time, for companies, especially when they want to look into the future, and they have to really pay attention to the human natures, especially pay attention to the diversities and try to include more ideas and more differences. At the same time, try to work with the stakeholders and to create values. So here I will probably share with you briefly of the different parts. So here I know that many countries are still experiencing the impact of the virus in China. I think this is a very interesting example on the right. So here you can see on the right, it's basically a volunteering activity by the citizens in Shanghai. What they did is that when back in February and March, we were actually, everybody was staying indoors. So our life really depending a lot on the deliveries. So all the persons that are joining the delivery team are being respected so much. People want to show appreciation to them. So they bring out the things that I would like to share with the delivery guys, with those that have been serving the society. So they put out flowers, they put out food, they put out even the sneakers or the kids' tools, for example, pencils and things relevant for free to those servants for the society to pick. So when they pass by, they can just pick whatever they need and it's totally for free. And you can donate everything or anything that you want to share with them there. So this is a very, I would say, very touching practices that's being actually kind of helps us to reflect on the beginning, right? The sentiments, the law and reasons. So people try to care a lot about the society and the way to care about each other. So this is how, when you're looking at Chinese culture, why it has been so successfully having this social distancing. People are trying to be part of it, to be able to solve it. So this is very interesting for us. But at the same time, you will also see that companies are trying so hard to implement technology to help. So this is a driverless car to clean the streets in Wuhan, in Hubei province. So many of the technology has been implemented during this specific hard time. So this is the first point I would like to share with you. The second point is that because of this, many of the things are being brought online. So even though many of the company are, especially internet company, are practicing 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week of practices, is given this online life, many companies are becoming 24/7, meaning that you're always online, you're working all the time. So this has become a problem or challenge for many of the employees and also the managers. So sometimes, especially for Chinese companies, especially for those are going to the national market, they have to really respect human nature. It's not necessarily those practices working in China will work internationally. They have to figure out a way how to manage that, how to be able to make it easier for individual to choose. So the C-trip example, I will not go into details, but feel free to search on the internet. There's a study on it. It's basically C-trip try to put, given the opportunity for the employees to work at home, and they actually have really interesting results. So that kind of shows like companies think about how to respect human nature and make the formats more diversified to fit into the needs of the individual employees. And the last point, I will actually answer the second point I would like to share is also, it's very important when companies go international. It's about how to embrace that differences at the same time, create an inclusive culture to motivate creativity instead of encouraging or just like trigger those conflicts. So Funplay is a very interesting company that has been established globally. It's actually a really successful Chinese brand. It's located, they have headquarters in China, in the United States, etc. And feel free to search their story as well. So they kind of try to include a very diversified employee group. So they have employees from all over the world, and many of them are actually working in Beijing, which is amazing. And the last point, of course, is how we are able to work with the stakeholders. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to actually share with you more about this very interesting milk brand. It's basically a brand very interesting that they focus on the yogurt at the beginning, and they were making a lot of money, but the founder, because he was so sad about the incident of the dairy industry, because you will probably know back in the days, the Chinese brand was devastated because of the poison milk products. And this founder, he decided to actually want to provide a safe milk powder product for the babies in China. So he spent years in producing that. And he was actually successfully entering the market, even though there's no necessary for him to actually focus on the milk product because he was actually making yogurt products. So this is another example, I mean, the last example I would like to share with you, because when we talk about creating values with the stakeholders, the nationality, I will mean, 家国情怀 is basically also a Chinese value that talks about as a leader, as a manager in China, if you want to be successful, if you are supposed or be perceived as successful, you will always keep in mind the people and the country, and of course, and the identity as a Chinese. So I guess this is something I would like to share with you. And the last slides, because you will see in the sharing, I will not continue with that. I will just probably go over to the questions. This will be in the slides as well. Some videos and book documentaries I would like to share with you. So maybe now we can move to the questions if we still have some time. Okay, I have one here. Can you please elaborate what are we comparing, or what is the difference between value and ethics in the situation where we should focus on values and not ethics? That's a great point. So at the beginning, when I asked the definitions of ethics, you will find that ethics is actually bounded by the context, meaning that in certain culture, right or wrong could be actually not right or wrong in another context. So in that sense, ethics might not work, or sometimes ethics is not necessarily being practicable, meaning that the things that you think is correct might not be perceived as correct across different cultures. But when we talk about values, it's not really actually based on only the moral values. It's actually a broader category. It's actually a more I would say, synthesized, definition or concept that the company could actually develop over time. And also they can develop by learning with different partners, with different contexts. So in that sense, it's very important not just focus on taking the ethics that you have in your cultural context as the only rule when you enter other contexts. But at the same time, you're also very much important to learn across the different cultures, the values that they believe in. So that will kind of create the bridge between the different cultures. I hope that answers your question though. So the next question is that, are Chinese management principle theories also applied outside of China? Of course, you might also ask yourself, right? If you can find any examples, the companies in your culture also facing the challenges of not being able to communicate with the people. I think that happens a lot of times, because when we talk about stakeholders, the community, the society is very important, and they can play a really strong role. At the same time, the internet, the social media always send off certain feelings, right? That could also serve as some challenges for many of the companies. It does not have to be restricted in China. It will be very easy for you to find examples. I mean, I could just maybe share with you the Facebook. Just a few years back, Facebook was facing a lot of criticism because of the conspiracy and the data issue. And they were not really managing well. And then they will not really pay attention to a lot of the criticism. And today, you don't see much changes. And they are facing challenges of that as well. So I guess companies have to really pay attention to the values and the norms, which is included in the culture in a specific context. I hope I answered those questions. If you have more, please do let me know. Okay, so when it comes to business decision-making, would you say that Chinese companies are acting more value-based and responsible than American firms? I cannot compare because there are too many companies, right? It's almost not comparable. I think we can only compare companies in the same industry and a company with another company. If you have another example, maybe between the companies, I think that's easier to compare. But I would say that in general, Chinese companies or Chinese leaders focus a lot on the values. So they try to kind of create a mechanism that kind of helps the value to blend in, to kind of either by learning or either by other methodologies to try to make it work. So I guess the Fuyao glass also kind of shows like certain conflicts in that as well. Companies will, I'm not saying that it's a good case, but it also shows that companies who use really pragmatic ways to manage values, that not necessarily is the good way. I think for other companies that could do better. One example I would like to share with you are some of the Chinese companies managing in India. And you probably know that religion is very important in India. And some of the Chinese companies are facing challenges that they're not able to actually absorb the local culture. So they were not able to influence their local employees. So more and more Chinese companies are trying to learn that. For example, Xiaomi and Vivo, they're both smartphone companies. So they try to invite local managers onto their team to help them to learn the local culture. So by bringing in the local talents and professionals, they might be able to learn more about the local cultures and the local values. hope I answered that. And okay, here another question. What would you say about the future management methods for Chinese companies in terms of reaching out to their stakeholders? Well, I guess for the Chinese company reaching out, I think first of all, they have to really define who are the stakeholders, because for each company, the stakeholder could be very different. And if you're looking into the current tools that you might find, for example, stakeholder mapping, and the first step is always identify the stakeholders. And then you will start think about the influences on you, if they're interested in you, etc. And then you figure out how to manage relationships with them. So the first step will always be identifying and learning who they are. And then based on that, you can design different strategies or design different ways that you manage that. But always keep in mind though, there's no, because I think in the common practices, we talk a lot about best practices for CSR, for stakeholder management, but I don't think that's the case, because for each company, they have their own sets of stakeholders, meaning that they have to have their own unique system of management towards the stakeholder management, the stakeholder relationships. So I hope that could start open a window for you guys to also think about it. Is there, shall we continue? Because I realize the time is actually, we're running a lot more time.
Maybe we can take this last one, and then if you have any other question, you can send them to the student board email or the email you received the invitation link, so we can in case forward you the answers.
Great. So let's take this as a last question. Is there a difference in regard to trust and importance of network between American and China? Guanxi is very relevant. Yes, Guanxi is really relevant. But the way you define Guanxi could be very different across different contexts, and also the receiving ends with all the network, what a network looks like, right? So I think that goes back to the stakeholder point of view, is that stakeholder actually is in your Guanxi network. How you identify them, who's supposed to be included in the Guanxi network. I know that I have also noticed that in many of the research by the Western scholars that they always point out government is the most important player when you establish a Guanxi network. Yes, they are really important, especially when you enter into a region, because they're the ones setting out the law and regulations, right? You have to follow that, that's the foundation. But at the same time, you will also think about the different stakeholders. They should be considered. For example, if you want to manage sentiments, the sentiment usually coming from the people, from the society. So they are also important in your networks. So Guanxi is definitely important. I cannot say that, because in America, the Guanxi also very important because they have the lobbying laws, right? The company can actually lobby in the government. So in that sense, I think in both country, network matters and Guanxi matters, but it could present in a different way and being managed in different ways. And of course, this is our last question. I hope we have good conversation. And if you have any questions, please do leave it in here as well. So I will maybe in another way to answer those questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I was taking note of the last questions, so in case we can respond later. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Chen, for joining us to the CEMS webinar series, and thank you, everyone, for joining us in this really interesting discussion. I hope to see you guys soon somewhere in the world and not on a screen, and have all a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's my pleasure.